Hello and welcome. This is Nicole at Pixel Maven's Retreat. This time I'm working on a project for Festive Friday. Our prompts for Challenge 36 are 4th of July and summer. To me, fruit popsicle and summer go hand in hand, so I'm doing this fun, quick and clean popsicle trio with a simple hello sentiment. I'm using the Stamp Market's All Lined Up Sentiment set and Scrapbook.com's hybrid black ink to get the sentiment on some Arches 140-pound hot press watercolor paper. I have this Sizzix sticky sheet in my stamp positioner. I found that it works a lot better than magnets to keep my cardstock in place, and I can shift the cardstock easily for repeat stamping, which I'll be doing next here. So I'm setting up this popsicle image from Altenew's Way Too Sweet stamp set. I'm doing some repeat stamping here, so I'm adding pencil marks at 1 and 5/16, 2 and 5/8, and 3 and 15/16. I am setting up the popsicle on the farthest pencil mark, making sure that the mark is in the center of the image. And once the stamp is on the lid, everything's going to line up perfectly all the way across. So after stamping the first popsicle, I can move the panel to the right to align the center popsicle. And I'm using this plastic sheet to protect the panel as I figure out the alignment. It's a total project saver. To be honest, I thought I had the measurements figured out for where the panel should go each time, but I seem to have some trouble with that this time. So with that sticky sheet in place, it was really easy to move the panel until the pencil mark ends up in the center of the popsicle each time. So I repeated this process for a third time to get the final popsicle in place. Again, I had to move the panel a few times to get the stamp aligned with the pencil mark. I'm sure there's a way to figure out the math for getting the panel in the right place, but it just wasn't coming to me at the time. And that was the end of stamping for this project. I like to clean up my stamps right away, especially with hybrid inks, because the ink will still come off easily. Once it's dried on, it takes just a little elbow grease. So I had those all cleaned up, and then I used an eraser to get rid of the pencil marks, and then I just shot this with my heat gun real quick to make sure that the ink was all completely set. Then it was on to watercoloring. I'm using Distress inks to watercolor because I just love their vibrant color. I smush the ink squares into my watercolor palettes, add a little water, and go. I started with Vintage Photo to color in the popsicle sticks. It's really watered down a lot, so it's a pretty light color, but I'll come back in and add some shading later. Then I moved on to the sentiment, which I colored in Mode Lawn. As you can see, I'm using this really small brush. It's from a set I just got made by Transon. They're a natural and synthetic blend, and I'm really in love with the way they put down color. I feel like I have a lot more control with them than I did with the cheaper all synthetic brushes. This one is a size 0, so it's really great for small details. You can see that I'm really just able to get the color right in there, and I'm not having any issues with the color bleeding out or anything like that. But at this point, I decided that the green really wasn't bright enough, so I added in some more, and I actually went back to add in some more so I could deepen the color and make it look just as vibrant as the original sample. Just a note about natural brushes, they do take a bit more care. You never want to scrub them, even in your water dish. And when you dry them, it's really important to shape them back to their original shape so the hairs don't end up sticking out. Before I moved on to the popsicles themselves, I went ahead and added in those shadows to the popsicle sticks. The areas were completely dry, so it was easy to add in some more Vintage Photo to give that a little bit of a darker edge. Now I'm moving into the popsicles themselves. This first one is in Seedless Preserves. I'm wetting the watercolor card so that it's easier to lay in the color and keep it inside the lines. Hot press watercolor card can take a lot of water, so that makes it really easy to move the color around, especially for wet on wet techniques like this. I'm going to go back and add in a second layer after the first is dry, so I don't need perfection the first time out. And I'm even going to do some color blending for the shadow on the dimension of the popsicle, so I don't need to get that space filled in. The second popsicle is in Spice Marmalade. My ink spot seems to be especially juicy, so I added in more water to make the color saturation match the first popsicle. You may have noticed that I'm using a different size brush. This is a number 2 from the same Transom collection. This set came with 8 round brushes from size 0 to 7. I think it's a really great set for card makers. The third popsicle is in picked raspberry. I'm following the same process as before, trying to keep the saturation the same across all three popsicles. I've noticed that because picked raspberry is so bright, it can easily overcome a project, so adding more water to start is a really good idea. I'm going back to add a second layer of color to get a shadow to pop up on the left. I'm using my heat tool to speed up some of the drying because I don't want the shadows to really blend all the way across. Drying helps to keep the layers in place. So instead of allowing them to bleed across the popsicle, I can add shadows very specifically, blending out the edge as I want. I'll dry the panel real quick and then get started with some color blending. I'm going to pull out my swatches for the three popsicle colors because I want to log the results of adding black to each of the hues. I was hoping that it would dull the color a bit, much like a real shadow would occur in a natural way. So here you'll see I'm mixing in just a tiny bit of black soot with the orange marmalade. And it gives me this nice rusty orange color that I can just add to the side of the popsicle. And I've switched back to my zero size brush because it is such a small space. So a little bit of black goes a long way. And I even noticed that adding black to picked raspberry made it look really like seedless preserves. So that's why those two colors are really in harmony with each other. They're really just a shade off, and it's the amount of black that's used in seedless preserves that gives it that darker purplish color. So adding black to seedless preserves makes it look even more dull, and it worked out perfectly for those little side images. So again, I will just heat set this up so that I can move on to the next part of the project. I just hit the back a little bit to make sure that everything is completely dry because we'll be moving on to some die cutting and I don't want the ink to get all over the place. So I pull out my die for the popsicle and go ahead and run that through the Big Shot. It's a standard sandwich, so there's really nothing cosmic here. What you will notice is that I do have a sheet of typing paper that goes over it. And the reason for this is because I'm going to be using both pieces, the cutout piece and the cutouts. So I don't want there to be any kind of stray indents or markings from the top acrylic plate. Just by adding that small piece of typing paper, it keeps it from getting any kind of stray marks. So once I had it cut out, I went ahead and grabbed a piece of fun foam sheet and marked where the popsicles were so I could create a little frame that I can use to pop up this whole panel. I've really enjoyed using the fun foam sheets over using tear adhesive because it just gives it a nice weight and it makes that piece pop up really solid. So I'll cut two little strips to go down the middle because those are potential sag areas and I want to make sure they're fully supported but not seen. So it's super simple to get that in place and I've got that all cut up and ready to go. And just a little bit more adhesive and I can put this panel onto the card base. Super simple to align. Using the Tombow adhesive for the fun foam works out great. It adheres faster than you think it would, so it gives it a nice solid feel and it's not going to pop off when you hand it to somebody. So the last step here is to just add in these little popsicles right back in the holes that they came from. And I found it simplest to just go ahead and add some adhesive on the back and put them through the space, kind of like a reverse operation, if you remember that game from our childhood. I hope you enjoyed watching this card design from beginning to end and that it gives you some ideas for your own projects. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any projects as I publish here weekly. Thanks for watching and happy crafting!